Senator Cornyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can't improve on the statement of Senator Kennedy, but I do want to just add a few thoughts before we get to the amendment process. I can't help but believe that this is just another episode in a long-standing campaign of intimidation and harassment of the Supreme Court and its members. Not that long ago, we had a hearing where I played the video of Justice Clarence Thomas's confirmation hearing when he referred to the attacks, the false attacks against him, as a high-tech lynching. The reason I thought it was important to play that is because that happened a long time ago, and many people may have forgotten, or they may not know about the long-standing campaign of harassment and intimidation against the court. The most recent one is the whirlwind threat by the Majority Leader of the United States Senate. But it didn't start there. It started a long time ago. Justice Scalia liked to say that the United States is unique because of its independent judiciary. A lot of other countries have a parchment constitution. The old Soviet Union had one that read pretty well on paper. But without an independent judiciary, the rights and liberties of the people will not be preserved. They'll be dictated by whoever happens to be in power at the time. Now, some of the threats against the judiciary are overt, like the Senate Majority Leader. Others are more subtle or covert, like the letter that was sent by members of this Judiciary Committee and asked to defund the Supreme Court of $10 million if the Chief Justice did not put into effect a public code of ethics for justices of the court. That's a threat. It's not as bad as what Senator Schumer said, but it's a threat against the independence of the court. You do it my way, or we're going to cut your budget. I don't think it's any secret that our public institutions are under assault, all of our public institutions. And I would just ask for us to think just a moment about what this bill and this campaign of harassment, intimidation directed toward the Supreme Court, what that's doing to public confidence in our independent judiciary and most cherished and unique institutions. I used to be a judge for 13 years on the trial bench and the state Supreme Court, a total of 13 years as a judge. Judges have codes of ethics, just like the Senate has a code of ethics that is administered by an ethics committee. And we all understand how that process works. But I dare say that if the Supreme Court decided they didn't like the ethics code or the way the Senate Ethics Committee administered that ethics code, I dare say if the Supreme Court sent a letter over criticizing it or suggesting changes, I don't think any of us would take that seriously. Conversely, the Supreme Court and the judiciary is a co-equal branch of government. I can't help but believe that this long campaign of intimidation and harassment is designed not to treat it as a co-equal branch of government, not to build and maintain public confidence in some of our most important institutions, but rather to make it subservient to the will of Congress. You know, it used to be that the organized bar, the American Bar Association, or in my state, the Texas Bar Association, viewed it as their professional duty to defend the judiciary. Because judges cannot. They can't defend themselves. They're not a political branch of government. Now, when somebody attacks us or our opinion, that's part of the bargain. And we can take to the airways, we can take to the floor of the Senate, we can take to social media, we can defend ourselves. But the Supreme Court and the judiciary cannot by the nature of their job. So it falls to other responsible people to defend that institution, that unique institution which makes us different from literally the rest of the world. And I have no doubt, as Senator Kennedy alluded, that if the Supreme Court in its last term had decided a bunch of cases the way that our folks on the Democratic side liked, we wouldn't be having this hearing. We wouldn't be seeing all these attacks against the justices, the threats, the intimidation. You'd be just fine with it, as long as it's going your way. But the price we pay for an independent judiciary is we're not always going to agree with the decisions made by the judges. I think it was Robert Jackson who said the Supreme Court's not the Supreme Court because it's always right. It's final because they're right because they're final. I botched that paraphrase, but you get the point. Our colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle appear to be determined to cast the independent judiciary and the Supreme Court as just another political branch of office. That's why they talk about packing the Supreme Court at one point. Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, if anything would make the court look partisan, it would be that. One side saying, when we're in power, we're going to enlarge the number of judges so we would have more people who would vote the way we want them to. That's Ruth Bader Ginsburg, an icon among liberals and progressives. And what I worry about from the standpoint of the United States Senate, what do you think is going to happen when the shoe's on the other foot? You know what happens? We tend to sink to the lowest common denominator, and we also tend to operate based on precedent. So if the precedent is established here, do you know what the temptation is going to be like when the shoe's on the other foot? It may well prove to be irresistible. We saw that when Harry Reid decided that instead of the 51 votes that were required to confirm a judge, that all of a sudden the requirement was for 60. And our Democratic colleagues filibustered judge after judge after judge. Well, it only took us 10 years or so to turn that precedent around. But I would just appeal to our colleagues who care about this institution among our other important institutions. What's being proposed here today is not just a code of ethics. The Supreme Court has one. The federal judiciary has one. It's not perfect, just like I'm sure there's a code of ethics that applies to senators people don't like. Some of our colleagues have suggested, for example, we eliminate the ability of senators to trade in stocks on the stock market, for example. That's a debate we can have among ourselves, and we should. But our code of ethics isn't perfect either, but we're not going to welcome the idea of the Supreme Court sending us over a checklist of things that we should change as a co-equal branch of government. I don't think we're going to change a lot of minds here because the political forces have lined up. Either you're opposed to some of the decisions that the Supreme Court has made recently, or you accept them. And I think we all should be in a posture of accepting them, even if we don't like them. That's the price we pay for an independent judiciary. That's why judges have lifetime tenure. That's why judges' salaries cannot be reduced during their term of office. And I think our founders are rolling in their grave when they see how much the United States Senate and some of its leaders, including the majority leader, have engaged in this long campaign of intimidation and harassment and undermined public confidence in one of the most important institutions in our government.